Grand Forks, North Dakota, November 22, 2003. Snow had fallen early that year, a thin, white layer stretching over the parking lot of Columbia Mall. It was the kind of cold that made sound disappear, just the hum of streetlights and the soft crunch of boots against slush. Inside the mall, the glow of fluorescent light mixed with holiday displays that promised warmth, family, and cheer. At the cosmetics store Glow, 22-year-old Lena Meyers was finishing her shift. She smiled at a coworker, zipped her beige coat, and reached for her purse. A new one she'd bought the week before after saving tips from her campus cafe job. In her pocket was a folded note. Australia, Spring 2004, 1 day at a time. It was supposed to be her last weekend before Thanksgiving break. Finals were behind her. She planned to spend the week back home in Pequot Lakes with her mom, maybe decorate the porch with lights. Nothing about that day felt unusual. Surveillance cameras caught her leaving the store at 4:55 p.m. She adjusted her white knit hat, the one her mother gave her for luck, and stepped into the icy air. Her phone buzzed. She called her boyfriend, Ethan Lang, telling him she'd stop by her dorm before heading to dinner. The wind whistled through the receiver. A pause. Okay. The line went dead. By 5:10, the parking lot was nearly empty. A few cars idled near the north exit, their headlights cutting through the haze. A gray Oldsmobile sat farther back, engine running. No one noticed it. A mall security guard later said he saw a woman walking toward the east side exit, then bending slightly. Maybe she dropped her bag. He turned to answer his radio. When he looked back, she was gone. That night, snow thickened into sleet. At 8:30, Ethan called again. No answer. By 9 o'clock, worry replaced reason. He drove to the dorm, then to the mall. Her car was still there, unlocked, keys missing, driver's door ajar. On the pavement lay her white hat, wet from melting snow, and a black knife sheath half buried in mud. He called the police. Officers arrived at 9:47 p.m. They marked off the area with yellow tape, their breath clouding under the parking lot lights. One officer wrote in his report, "No sign of struggle inside the vehicle. Purse missing. Unknown direction of travel." By midnight, temperatures dropped to single digits. Wind rattled the metal shopping carts near the entrance. Somewhere between the last customer leaving and the first patrol car arriving, a young woman had vanished into the dark, without a sound, without a trace. The next morning, shoppers walked past the taped section, whispering. A single glove lay on the snowbank, one that didn't belong to Lena. Detectives would later test it, but no usable prints were found. In the coming days, the story would spread beyond North Dakota. A missing college senior, a parking lot, a phone call cut short. But on that first night, it was only silence. No one knew that the stretch of asphalt outside Columbia Mall would become a wound that never healed, a place where winter never really ended. Because after that call, after the click and the static, no one ever heard from Lena Meyers again. Before the headlines and the press conferences, Lena was just another student trying to make her way through the long winters of North Dakota. People who knew her still remember how she moved through the world, quietly, with a kind of calm that softened the edges of every room she entered. She grew up in Pequot Lakes, Minnesota, a small town surrounded by frozen pines and lakes that stayed glassy half the year. Her mother, Carol, taught second grade. Her father had passed away when Lena was 12, leaving behind an old wooden canoe that still leaned against the garage wall. Every summer, Carol and Lena would paddle across the lake at sunset. Carol always said the same thing, "You can't control the water, honey, just steer steady." That quiet steadiness stayed with her. At the University of North Dakota, she studied graphic design, worked part-time at the campus cafe, and took another job at Glow to cover tuition. She didn't complain about being tired. Friends said she never raised her voice, never lost her temper, not even when life pushed hard. Her roommate, Jenna, once joked that Lena was the sunshine of winter. When the wind howled outside the dorms, Lena brewed tea for everyone on the floor. She left small doodles taped to the door, tiny sketches of snowmen, birds, or faces smiling beneath scarves. It wasn't much, but in the gray months of Grand Forks, kindness stood out like color against ice. She kept her dreams in a journal. On the last page, she wrote, "Someday I'll stand barefoot on a beach in Australia. No coats, no frost, just the sound of the ocean." That's why she worked so much, saving every dollar for that trip. The week she disappeared, she'd finally reached her goal. Enough for a plane ticket. The day before she vanished, she and Jenna decorated their dorm window with fairy lights. Lena laughed about the static on her phone line whenever she called home. "It's this town," she said. "Even the wind sounds lonely here." Her life wasn't dramatic. No secrets, no debts, no enemies. She had a boyfriend, Ethan Lang, a senior in mechanical engineering. They met at a study group 2 years earlier. He once said she had a voice that could calm a storm. They planned to spend Thanksgiving at her mom's house, bring board games, maybe watch old VHS movies by the fireplace. What makes cases like hers so haunting is that nothing about her story warned anyone. She wasn't reckless. She didn't drink heavily or walk alone at night, except that one evening. She parked where the lights were bright only a few yards from the mall entrance. That weekend was supposed to be full of beginnings. Lena had just submitted her final design project, a poster series for a community art show called Winter Light. The concept was about finding beauty in ordinary places: a cracked sidewalk, a flickering street lamp, a forgotten bench by the river. Her professor later said it captured exactly who she was, hopeful without being naive. When investigators later searched her dorm, they found her sketchbook still open on the desk. The last drawing was of a single glove lying on snow, half buried but still visible. In the corner, she'd written 2 words in pencil, "Still warm." Carol keeps that drawing framed now, beside her daughter's photograph. She still calls it the most Lena thing ever, to find warmth even in something lost. People in Pequot Lakes light a candle for Lena every November. The local cafe sets out a jar labeled "For the Sunshine of Winter," collecting donations for missing persons searches. The community doesn't talk much about crime or danger. They talk about light, how one person's kindness can linger even after everything else fades. In the months following her disappearance, news reporters described her as the perfect victim: kind, polite, careful. But those who loved her hated that phrase. She wasn't a headline. She was a daughter who still called home every Sunday night to ask if her mom needed anything from Target. She was a student who stayed late to help her classmate finish a portfolio. And on that freezing November evening, when she walked out of Glow for the last time, Lena was thinking about tomorrow, about dinner, the drive home, and maybe, just maybe, a little sunlight after finals. No one could have known that her white knit hat, a symbol of her mother's warmth, would become the last trace of her left behind in the snow. Because in Grand Forks the sunshine of winter had gone out, and the season suddenly felt much colder. Saturday, November 22nd, 2003. The last daylight slipped behind the mall before 5 o'clock. Parking lot lights flickered on, one by one, scattering long shadows over melting snow. Security cameras caught everything in fragments: doors opening, cars pulling away, snow swirling under the lamps. At 4:55 p.m., Lena left Glow with her phone pressed to her ear, her other hand holding a paper bag of leftover pastries from the cafe. Her voice was calm, steady, even as the wind picked up. At 5:02, the call with Ethan cut off. The phone went silent. For most people, that small detail might have passed unnoticed. Phones die, signals drop. But for Lena, that call was the last mark of her being alive. When Ethan tried calling again at 6:00, it went straight to voicemail. He thought she might have stopped for gas, maybe met a friend. But as the hours passed, the pattern broke. Lena always texted. She always said goodnight. By 8:00, worry crept in. He called her dorm. No answer. He drove to the mall, heart pounding as he pulled into the lot, headlights cutting through mist. There it was, Lena's silver Saturn, parked in the same row as always. Snow dusted the hood, untouched since afternoon. He walked closer. The driver's door was slightly open. Inside, the seatbelt hung twisted. Her phone charger was still plugged in. He called her name once, then again. The echo vanished into the wind. When police arrived just before 10:00 p.m., they treated it as a missing persons case, not yet a crime scene. The responding officer, Sergeant Howell, noted no clear evidence of struggle. But on the ground near the front tire, a black knife sheath lay half buried in slush. It didn't belong to Lena. And then, the hat. The white knit hat her mother had given her. Found lying upside down in the snow, one side smeared with something dark. Maybe soot, maybe oil from the pavement. Detectives took photos, marked footprints that trailed toward the north exit, and collected what they could before the cold hardened the ground. A single witness came forward the next morning, a mall employee who remembered seeing a man in his 50s, heavyset, standing near a gray Oldsmobile. He'd been there before, she said, just sitting, watching the lot. No one had thought much of it. Grand Forks wasn't the kind of place where people expected danger. Investigators reviewed the surveillance tapes frame by frame. At 4:57, Lena crossed the lot. At 4:58, a gray car rolled forward from the far corner. At 5:00, the camera panned the wrong way, catching only falling snow and taillights. No footage showed what happened in the next 60 seconds. That gap, that minute of missing images, would haunt the case for years. By Sunday morning, volunteers gathered in the mall's back lot, passing out flyers with Lena's photo. Missing, last seen wearing beige coat, white knit hat. Wind tore the corners off the posters, scattering them down the road toward Fisher, Minnesota, the direction her phone last pinged before going dark. Officers traced that signal to a rural stretch along the Red River, 25 miles away. Snow covered everything. Fields, ditches, frozen cattails. They searched for hours with flashlights, calling her name through the wind. Nothing. Carol Meyers arrived before dawn, her daughter's coat folded in her arms. She stood beside the sheriff's truck, watching the light fade from pink to gray. She wouldn't just leave, she told them quietly. Not without saying goodbye. Detectives checked Lena's bank card. No withdrawals. Her car hadn't moved. No one had seen her at any gas station or rest stop. It was as if she had stepped off the edge of the map. That night, Columbia Mall closed early. Outside, students from UND lit candles in a circle near the north exit, the place where her hat had been found. Their breath rose in clouds as they prayed, voices trembling in the cold. For a town like Grand Forks, used to steady winters and small-town predictability, this felt unreal. Parents stopped letting their daughters walk alone. Store managers began escorting employees to their cars. The parking lot lights seemed dimmer now, even though they hadn't changed. Every disappearance leaves behind a sound. Not the scream, not the chase, but the silence that follows. The silence that spreads through hallways, into newsrooms, through the hearts of people who realize danger doesn't always come from far away. Sometimes it waits in the corner of a familiar parking lot. And on that November night, as snow turned to ice and footprints disappeared, the world closed over the last trace of Lena Meyers. Somewhere out there, someone knew what had happened in those missing 60 seconds. But for now, there was only the white hat, the empty car, and the unanswered phone. By Sunday evening, the calm rhythm of Grand Forks had shattered. The news spread faster than the storm clouds that rolled in from the plains. A young woman, 22, vanished from the Columbia Mall parking lot without a sound. At first, people thought it must be a mistake. Maybe she'd gone to a friend's place. Maybe her phone had died. But by nightfall, every local station carried her picture, Lena Meyers, last seen wearing a beige coat and a white knit hat. The wind rose again that night, pushing flurries across Highway 2. Search teams gathered outside the mall, headlights cutting through the snow. They fanned out along the ditches, calling her name through cupped hands. "Lena! Lena!" The voices faded quickly into the wind. At the command post, volunteers signed in, took flashlights, radios, coffee, and paper cups. Students from the University of North Dakota came in groups, still wearing campus hoodies under heavy parkas. Many had never met her, but everyone knew someone like her. By midnight, more than 200 people were searching. Others stayed behind to print flyers, missing, Lena Meyers, age 22. They posted them at gas stations, diners, every telephone pole along the Red River corridor. That night, Carol Meyers drove from Pequot Lakes through sleet and black ice, gripping the steering wheel until her fingers went numb. She kept her daughter's photo on the passenger seat, next to a folded beige coat. When she reached Grand Forks, it was nearly 2:00 a.m. She didn't sleep. "I just need to help," she told police. "Tell me where to go." They searched the Red River banks the next morning, where Lena's phone had last pinged near Fisher, Minnesota, 25 miles from the mall. Frozen reeds cracked underfoot. Deputies dragged the shoreline with hooks, the cables squealing in the cold. Each time they pulled the line back, it came up empty, just clumps of ice and river mud. In town, strangers stopped each other at grocery stores asking for updates. Candlelight vigils began outside the mall's north exit, where she was last seen. Dozens of people stood in silence, their breath glowing in the cold air, the candles flickering wildly in the wind. "Please," Carol whispered into a microphone that night, her voice trembling. "If anyone knows anything, please let my daughter come home." Television cameras captured the moment. A mother's face pale in the candlelight, framed by a sea of white hats worn by students in solidarity. Across the state, churches held prayer circles. The local radio station played soft hymns between news reports. Detectives worked around the clock, reviewing every lead. They questioned shoppers, mall employees, delivery drivers. Most had seen nothing. A few remembered a gray car, maybe an Oldsmobile, parked near the north exit, the same spot where Lena's hat had been found. Still, no trace. The search moved beyond Grand Forks, to farm fields, bridges, drainage culverts. Helicopters scanned the riverbanks with infrared cameras, their searchlights sweeping over miles of frozen land. On the 5th day, the National Guard joined in. A blizzard hit on the 6th. Snow buried everything, tracks, flyers, even hope. The command post tents collapsed under the weight of ice. The search had to pause. Inside the sheriff's office, Carol sat alone, her coat draped over her shoulders, staring at the evidence board. Photos of the parking lot. A map dotted with red pins. Her daughter's smile frozen on a poster. Detective Howell stepped in quietly. "We're not giving up," he said. She nodded, but her eyes stayed on the photo. "She's cold," she murmured. "She hates the cold." That sentence stayed with him. In the days that followed, the investigation turned from search to survival, and from survival to recovery. But no one said that word out loud. Outside, candles kept burning at the mall entrance, snow melting around their bases like tiny halos. Strangers left flowers, notes, stuffed animals. Each night, a small crowd returned, silent, holding hands, staring into the empty lot where the world had gone quiet. Grand Forks, once a town defined by calm predictability, now carried a different rhythm. Police radios, the crackle of ice, the sound of names whispered into the wind. What terrified people most wasn't just that Lena had vanished. It was how easily it had happened. A bright parking lot, a busy Saturday, and in 1 minute, gone. From that week on, no one parked alone near the north exit. Store clerks asked for escorts. College students traveled in pairs. A kind of collective fear settled over the community, quiet but heavy, like the snow itself. And in every home, every classroom, someone whispered the same thought before turning off the light. If it could happen to her, it could happen to anyone. 1 week after Lena vanished, winter locked Grand Forks beneath a hard shell of ice. The Red River froze over, smooth as glass, and searchers now walked across it instead of beside it. Hope was turning brittle. Detectives had combed through hours of footage from Columbia Mall's security system, but every lead ended in the same blank frame, the minute the camera panned away. It felt like the story itself was resisting them. Then, on November 29th, a break came quietly. A patrol officer spotted a gray Oldsmobile parked behind an apartment complex not far from the mall. The car matched witness descriptions. Older model, dented fender, tinted windows. Its plates belonged to a man named Alfonso Rodriguez, Jr., age 50. He was a recently released sex offender who had served 23 years for assault. He lived with his mother in nearby Crookston, Minnesota, just across the river. Detectives drove out the next morning. The house was small, paint peeling, a lone mailbox leaning in the snow. Rodriguez answered the door in a flannel shirt, calm, almost polite. "We're following up on a case," Detective Howell said. "A missing student from UND. We'd like to ask a few questions." Rodriguez didn't ask which student, he only nodded. The Oldsmobile was parked in the driveway. Inside, investigators saw a folding knife under the seat, blade clean, handle worn. They also noticed a faint reddish smear on the door frame. It was enough for a warrant. In the lab, DNA tests later confirmed what everyone feared. The blood matched Lena Meyers. They found blonde hairs on the passenger side carpet, fibers matching her coat, and mud consistent with the soil from the Columbia Mall parking lot. The sheath recovered at the scene fit the knife perfectly. Rodriguez said little during questioning. He claimed he had been shopping that afternoon, just looking around. When asked why his car was seen circling the north exit, he shrugged. "Maybe I took the wrong turn." When confronted with the DNA evidence, he leaned back in the chair and said only, "I didn't kill anyone." No confession, no body. But the weight of science spoke louder than his silence. By early December, the news broke. Convicted offender arrested in connection with UND student's disappearance. Reporters camped outside the police station. Cameras caught Carol Meyers arriving, clutching her daughter's photo. She didn't speak to them. Inside, detectives explained the findings, careful with their words. The evidence tied Rodriguez to Lena's car, but without her body, the case remained uncertain. The district attorney pushed forward anyway. "We can't wait for spring," he told the press. "We need to act before the trail freezes over." Grand Forks turned from fear to fury. Candlelight vigils became protests. Parents demanded harsher parole laws. Students gathered on campus holding signs that read, "Justice for Lena." But beneath the anger, there was exhaustion, a kind of grief that had no clear place to land. Investigators retraced Rodriguez's movements. He'd been released from prison just 6 months earlier, supposedly under supervision. He told neighbors he spent most days driving to clear his head. One remembered seeing his car parked near the mall often, facing the same row where Lena's Saturn had been. The details fit too well. Too neat. Yet something in Howell resisted closure. He kept replaying the footage. Lena walking, the gray car moving, the frame cutting away. It was all there except the moment. Without that, everything else felt like shadow. Still, the case moved forward. Rodriguez was charged with kidnapping resulting in death, a federal offense carrying the death penalty. The state's attorney called it a landmark case for North Dakota. Carol attended every hearing. She sat in the front row, a folded white hat resting in her lap. Silent as evidence was presented: the knife, the sheath, the photographs of tire tracks in snow. When the prosecutor described the DNA results, Carol closed her eyes. The science was undeniable, but the story still felt unfinished. At the press conference afterward, a reporter asked, "Do you believe this man acted alone?" The detective hesitated before answering. Right now, all evidence points to him. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Because even as Rodriguez sat behind bars, one unsolved detail remained. Traffic camera footage from a nearby intersection captured a second vehicle leaving the mall around 5:05 p.m., just after Lena's phone went dark. The driver was never identified. Whether it was coincidence or connection, no one could say. And so the case became a battle between evidence and absence, between a mother's hope and a town's fear. Grand Forks braced for a long winter ahead, waiting for something no one wanted to find. Winter in North Dakota doesn't end so much as it fades, slowly, reluctantly. By January 2004, the search for Lena had quieted, the snow swallowing what little evidence remained. For Carol Meyers, each day began the same way. She scraped frost from her windshield, packed a thermos of coffee, and drove toward the places her daughter might still be. The official search had paused, but Carol never stopped. Every weekend, she and a handful of volunteers drove the back roads between Grand Forks and Crookston. They tied yellow ribbons to fence posts, one for every day since Lena disappeared. When they ran out of ribbon, they used torn fabric, old scarves, anything that could stand against the wind. The town changed with the season. Posters that once hung bright on lampposts faded to pale ghosts of ink. Students went back to class. Reporters moved on to new stories. Only the Meyers family remained, frozen in the same moment, the same unanswered question. Each time snow fell, Carol wondered what it was covering. By February, the case had gone cold. Detectives still reviewed tips, but they led nowhere. A hunter reported seeing tire ruts near a remote ditch along Highway 75. Another claimed to find a piece of fabric near the river. Both turned out to be false alarms. The silence that followed was worse than the fear. In March, temperatures rose just enough for the first thaw. Streams of dirty snowmelt ran along the shoulders of the road, carrying the winter away one drip at a time. Then came April. On the morning of April 17, 2004, a farmer near Crookston noticed something wrong. The air was still, but there was a smell, heavy, unmistakable, coming from a roadside ditch behind his field. When deputies arrived, they found what months of searching hadn't: the remains of a young woman, bound at the wrists, partially concealed under brush. Nearby, a small knit hat lay flattened in the mud, its once white yarn stained gray. The lab confirmed what everyone already knew. DNA matched to Lena Meyers. The discovery reached Carol before the official call. A neighbor came to her door, face pale, holding the newspaper. Carol didn't cry. She simply sat down at the kitchen table and said, "I knew she hated the cold." That night, candles once again burned outside Columbia Mall. This time, there were no posters, no search maps, only silence. Students left flowers. Strangers brought white hats. Across the state, people who had never met Lena stood outside in the cold for 1 minute of quiet, as if to give her back the time she had lost. Detectives revisited the evidence. The knife, the car, the DNA, it all pointed to Rodriguez. But now they had the final piece: proof of death. The prosecution prepared for trial. For Carol, closure wasn't comfort. It was a line drawn between before and after. She kept Lena's sketchbook on her nightstand, still open to the last drawing. A single glove on snow, half buried but still visible. "Still warm," her daughter had written. She touched those words every night before bed. In Grand Forks, life moved on, but not back. The empty parking space at the mall remained unclaimed for months. Store employees said the wind always seemed colder near the north exit. Some swore the overhead lights flickered there at night, just once, like a pulse. The police case files called it a resolved investigation. Locals called it a tragedy that never left town. For Carol, it was something else entirely. A season that refused to end. When the first spring rain came, washing the snow from the ditches, she drove to Crookston alone. The fields were bare again, wet and silent. She parked beside the stretch of road where her daughter had been found, rolled down the window, and listened to the wind move through the grass. No sirens, no reporters, just wind, and the faint rustle of something she chose to believe was peace. In a journal she kept from that year, she wrote, "They talk about closure like it's a door, but for me it's a window, one I can never quite shut. Some nights the cold still comes through and I let it." By summer, the yellow ribbons had faded to white. The case was no longer front-page news, but the story lived on in every parent who warned their child to park near the light, in every student who walked faster across the lot after dark. And somewhere beyond that frozen stretch of highway, justice was waiting, slow, steady, unblinking. Because even when winter ends, some things stay buried under the snow until someone is willing to dig them out. By summer 2006, the courtroom in Fargo was standing room only. Reporters filled the benches, their cameras stacked like a wall of eyes. Outside, protesters gathered in the heat, some demanding justice, others holding signs that simply said, "Remember Lena." After nearly 3 years of waiting, the people of Grand Forks finally had their day in court. The man sitting at the defense table, Alfonso Rodriguez Jr., looked almost ordinary. Thinning hair, glasses, a button-down shirt too large for his frame. But every glance toward him carried the weight of fear, anger, and years of silence. The prosecution opened with science. DNA on the knife sheath. Blood in the Oldsmobile. Fibers on the seat that matched Lena's coat. Photographs of the tire impressions frozen in snow, identical to the tread on Rodriguez's car. They didn't need theatrics. The evidence spoke for itself. Then came the testimony. Witnesses described the gray Oldsmobile parked near the north exit. One mall worker said she'd seen Rodriguez there more than once, watching young women leave. A criminologist explained how the knife's sheath found beside Lena's car fit perfectly into the blade found in Rodriguez's trunk. When the prosecutor displayed the photo of Lena's white knit hat, the courtroom went completely still. Even the ceiling fans seemed to stop. Carol sat in the front row, her hands clasped tight around the hat she had brought with her every day of the trial. She didn't look at Rodriguez. She didn't have to. The defense argued he was being scapegoated, that DNA could be contaminated, that Lena might have met someone else that night. They pointed to the missing 60 seconds of security footage, to the unidentified second car seen leaving the mall at 5:05 p.m. Reasonable doubt, they called it. But in a town still raw from loss, reason and doubt rarely shared the same room. After 3 weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. It took them just 5 hours. On February 8, 2007, the verdict was read aloud. Guilty of kidnapping resulting in death, a federal offense punishable by death. Rodriguez showed no reaction, no tremor, no glance toward the victim's family. He simply stared forward, expressionless. The courtroom broke in two, half in tears, half in relief. Outside, the crowd erupted. People wept, prayed, shouted. A group of UND students stood holding white candles in the daylight, whispering her name. That night, Carol spoke publicly for the first time. Her voice was steady, quieter than the microphones could pick up. "This doesn't bring her back," she said, "but maybe it keeps someone else safe. Maybe that's enough." For a time, Grand Forks felt a fragile peace. The monster had a name, and the system had spoken, but not everyone was convinced. Weeks after the sentencing, a small article ran in the Grand Forks Herald, a reference to the second vehicle mystery. A traffic camera, 2 blocks from the mall, had captured headlights moving in tandem with Rodriguez's car. Investigators had never identified that driver. Some locals began to wonder, was Rodriguez truly alone that night? Or had someone else helped, someone who knew the roads, someone who vanished just as easily as Lena had? Detective Howell still carried that question. He told a reporter years later, it was a clean case. Maybe too clean. But public anger left no room for uncertainty. People wanted closure, not theories. The sentence was sealed, and the town exhaled. Rodriguez was transferred to a federal facility in Terre Haute, Indiana, to await execution. For years, appeals came and went, none successful. Yet, in Grand Forks, the scars lingered. Students avoided the north parking lot. The mall built new lighting, new cameras. At night, even the hum of the vending machines felt uneasy. Every November, Carol returned to that same spot, laying a white rose beneath the lamppost where the snow first fell around her daughter's car. She never stayed long, just long enough for the wind to lift her hair and the silence to settle again. The newspapers eventually moved on. New crimes, new names, but for those who had lived through it, the story of Lena Meyers became part of the town's DNA, a constant reminder that even when justice arrives, peace doesn't always follow. Rodriguez never spoke another word about that night. Not during trial, not during appeals. His silence became part of the sentence, a permanent gap in the story. And somewhere in that gap, between what was proven and what was never explained, the cold of North Dakota seemed to take root again. The case was over, but the questions had only begun. Nearly 2 decades passed. The white ribbons along Highway 75 had long turned gray, and the parking lot at Columbia Mall no longer looked like a crime scene, just another place with too much light and too little warmth. The town had moved on, or at least learned to pretend it had. Then, in 2021, the silence cracked open again. A federal review team, young attorneys and forensic analysts too young to remember the original trial, began re-examining old capital cases. Among them was United States v. Rodriguez. What started as a procedural audit soon became something more. Buried in hundreds of pages of transcripts was a note. Medical testimony disputed, reliability questioned. It seemed minor, but it raised a larger question. Had Rodriguez received a fair trial under federal law? Judge Ralph Erickson, who now sat on the Eighth Circuit, reopened the issue. In his 2021 ruling, he vacated the death sentence, citing flawed testimony and ineffective counsel. The conviction stood, but the execution order was gone. For most of America, it was a small, procedural story. For Grand Forks, it was an earthquake. The town that had waited 20 years for closure suddenly found itself back where it started, between truth and uncertainty. Rodriguez was transferred from death row to a federal life sentence facility. Reporters revisited the case, producing documentaries and retrospectives with names like Justice in the Cold and The Vanishing Light of Grand Forks. Old pain resurfaced, but then another discovery changed everything again. During a forensic evidence inventory, part of the appeal review, technicians unearthed a small sealed envelope labeled Hat, Fiber and Debris. Inside was the white knit hat found beside Lena's car in 2003. Using advanced latent print recovery, a new forensic analyst lifted something that had been invisible before: a partial fingerprint. It didn't belong to Rodriguez. When the print was run through the updated AFIS database, it matched a man named Dale Horn, a long-haul truck driver with minor offenses, trespassing, DUI, and a record of frequent travel through Grand Forks. Investigators traced his file and found something stranger. Horn had vanished in 2008, 5 years after Lena's murder. His truck was discovered abandoned in a rest stop near Bismarck. No trace of him was ever found. For the first time in nearly 20 years, the case file for State v. Rodriguez gained a new tab: potential secondary involvement. The FBI cold case unit took over. They reviewed phone tower data, fuel receipts, and truck logs. Horn's routes placed him near Columbia Mall multiple weekends that fall, including November 22, 2003. Was he a witness who saw something? A man who tried to help and got too close? Or was he part of something larger, a predator who slipped away before the light found him? No one could answer. But for the Meyers family, it didn't matter what label the case carried. What mattered was the truth. Any truth. In a television interview that year, Carol sat in her kitchen beside a framed photo of Lena. The ribbon around the frame had faded, but her voice hadn't. "If there's more to the story," she said softly, "then it means she wasn't alone. It means there's still something left to find." The interview went viral, not for its emotion, but for its restraint. A mother not demanding vengeance, only understanding. By 2023, federal prosecutors formally withdrew their pursuit of execution. Rodriguez would live out his days behind bars. The court's language was clinical. The interests of justice no longer support capital punishment. But outside the courthouse, people asked the only question that mattered: had justice ever really been served? Because now, there was proof of another man. A fingerprint no one could explain, belonging to someone who had disappeared into the same kind of silence that once swallowed Lena. The story began to feel less like closure and more like a circle, one that might never end. A new generation of UND students started a volunteer group called Project White Hat, a team of amateur sleuths, data scientists, and criminology majors working with police to digitize old evidence. They said they didn't want to reopen wounds, just to make sure the past stayed visible. Every November 22nd, they meet at the mall's north lot. They light candles, read her name, and share updates on the ongoing forensic analysis. The files have new DNA tools now: touch DNA, trace profiling, technology that didn't exist in 2003, and each new test, each reanalyzed hair strand, carries the same quiet question written on every page of the report. If not him, then who? No one can say for sure, but the snow still falls the same way it did that night. Soft, steady, covering everything except the place where she disappeared. And somewhere inside a sealed evidence locker, the white knit hat waits again, holding, perhaps, one more story still trapped between its threads. 20 years. That's how long it's been since the night Lena disappeared. Grand Forks looks different now. Newer lights, new storefronts, a refurbished mall entrance. Yet, for those who remember, the north parking lot remains untouched in memory. People still avoid it after dark. Every November 22nd, when the air turns thin and the first snow begins to fall, Carol Meyers drives into town with a single white rose on the passenger seat. She parks near the same row where her daughter's car once stood. The pavement there always feels colder, as if the ground remembers. She lays the rose beneath the lamppost and sets down a folded hat, white, hand-knit, identical to the one Lena wore that night. The gesture has become quiet ritual. No speeches, no cameras. Just a mother and the sound of wind moving through empty space. Around her, life continues. Teenagers take selfies outside the mall. The Christmas lights come up earlier every year. But those who lived through 2003 know that something lingers here. Not a ghost, not a haunting, but the weight of what was never fully answered. The case of Lena Meyers is officially closed, yet never really finished. The discovery of the fingerprint in 2021 reignited public interest, and local volunteers, part of a group called Project White Hat, have taken on the cold case as if it were their own inheritance. They're not detectives, just people who grew up hearing the story whispered in their classrooms and living rooms. Each fall, they set up a table at the UND Student Center. Old photographs, timelines, maps of Grand Forks printed on poster board. They collect donations to fund DNA retesting, using the same slogan written on the first flyer ever printed after Lena vanished. Don't let the cold win. Technology has changed. So has how people remember. What was once tragedy now feels like part of the town's identity. A cautionary tale wrapped in frost. Detective Howell, now retired, still keeps a box of files in his garage. In one interview, he said, "I go back to that tape sometimes. The missing minute. Still don't know why the camera panned away. Still think about what it didn't show." He doesn't say her name aloud anymore, but the pause after her story's mention tells enough. For Carol, grief has become a rhythm. Not gone, just quieter. Her house in Pequot Lakes remains the same. A front porch light left on through every winter. A small framed photo by the window. She volunteers now with an organization that supports families of missing persons. She never calls herself an activist. She says she's just someone who understands the waiting. Grand Forks itself has tried to heal in small ways. A new memorial stands near the Red River Trail, a curved wall engraved with the names of missing or murdered North Dakotans. Beneath Lena's name is a simple line, "She brought light to the cold." People leave candles there each winter. Some burn out quickly in the wind. Others last all night. Meanwhile, the fingerprint that didn't match, the one found on the hat, remains a riddle. Forensic labs continue reanalyzing it using newer microchemical methods. Each update brings the same phrase, insufficient for new identification. Yet, even uncertainty can keep a story alive. When asked once whether she believed the right man was behind bars, Carol answered carefully, "I believe he was part of what happened. But I don't think he was all of it. I don't think truth ever fits in one pair of hands." In recent years, documentaries and podcasts have returned to her story. Dateline, 48 Hours, Cold Case Files, all revisiting the same facts, the same images, the parking lot, the white hat, The silence between two phone calls. None of them find what's missing, but all of them make sure it's not forgotten. At sunset, when snow begins to fall over Grand Forks, the lot behind Columbia Mall glows a faint orange under the old sodium lamps. To strangers, it's just another stretch of asphalt. To those who know, it's the edge of something sacred, the place where light and loss once met and never parted. And this November, like every one before it, Carol will come again. She'll brush snow from the curb, place her rose, and whisper, "Still warm." Words from her daughter's final sketchbook, before turning back toward the car. Some stories fade with time. Others stay suspended in it. The case of Lena Meyers has become both a scar and a reminder, a proof that justice and peace are not always the same thing. And as the wind moves through the mall lot, carrying bits of snow like ash through amber light, it's hard not to wonder, somewhere out there, beneath the years and the silence, what else is still waiting to be found? This story, though told through the name Lena Meyers, was inspired by a real woman. Her name was Drew Shodine, a 22-year-old student at the University of North Dakota. She vanished from the Columbia Mall parking lot in Grand Forks on November 22, 2003. The same day, the same cold air, the same fading light. Like Lena, Drew was described by friends as the sunshine of winter. She worked 2 jobs, studied graphic design, and had plans that stretched far beyond the frozen plains of the Midwest. Her disappearance sent a shock through the community, a reminder that even quiet places could hold dark corners. 5 months later, when spring finally broke the snow, her body was found near Crookston, Minnesota. The man responsible, Alfonso Rodriguez Jr., was arrested, tried, and sentenced to death. But from that tragedy came something larger than a single case. Drew's story changed federal law. In 2006, Congress passed the Drew Shodine National Sex Offender Public Website Act, creating a centralized registry that made it possible for families to see who lived near them, a digital shield built out of heartbreak. Today, millions of Americans use it to keep their loved ones safe. Her name became a symbol, not of fear, but of prevention. Yet those who knew her still say she shouldn't be remembered only for what happened, but for who she was before it. She loved snowboarding. She volunteered with children who had disabilities. She called her mom every night, no matter how busy she was, and she wore a white hat, just like the one described here. The fictionalized version of her story, Lena Meyers, was written not to dramatize, but to humanize, to remind us that true crime stories aren't about monsters. They're about the light that people leave behind. For every victim whose name fades from headlines, there is a mother who still checks the porch light, a friend who keeps an old voicemail, a community that quietly refuses to forget. This story is for them. For the detectives who stayed after hours, the volunteers who searched through snowstorms, the journalists who refused to look away, and the families who live in that long pause between missing and found. For Carol, and for every parent who wakes up to silence and still chooses hope. And most of all, for Drew Shodine, whose legacy became law and whose memory still moves people to act. Lessons learned from Lena's story, and Drew's truth. Never walk alone through dark parking lots. Even safe places can turn unfamiliar after dusk. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Speak up. Report suspicious behavior. Silence protects no one. Look out for one another. A simple check-in, a phone call, a light left on. Small things that save lives. 20 years later, the Columbia Mall still stands under new management. The paint is fresh, the signs are modern, but the wind that moves across its north parking lot feels the same. Cold, restless, remembering. Each November, a quiet group of people gather there. Old volunteers, retired officers, a few students who never knew Drew or Lena but know what her story means. They light candles, leave flowers, and whisper the same promise every year. We will not forget. In the glow of those candles, under the endless North Dakota sky, their reflections waver on the icy pavement. Small, human lights holding against the dark. Because every cold case begins with silence, but it doesn't have to end there. Some wounds can only be healed by the truth. If this story moved you, share it. Not for shock, not for fear, but for awareness. Because remembering keeps people safe. Because justice is not a moment. It's a memory we keep alive together. Subscribe to keep these stories alive, and to honor those who still wait for the truth.